For more than 10,000 years, the Adirondacks have been home to people who have benefited from the region's incredible bounty and pristine beauty. Indigenous peoples, European and American settlers, and generations of health seekers have found sustenance and support in the Adirondacks mountains and rivers, forests and lakes.
"13,000 years ago, there was roughly about a mile of ice above our heads where we are right now. And before the trees started to grow here in the Adirondacks, there's evidence of humans that were wandering, following the caribou. The mountains are plentiful of game, medicinal plants, wild edibles, there's food you can gather. But the Haudenosaunee are primarily agriculturalists, we're farmers, and our main crops were the corn, beans, and squash. And so there's been a human presence in these mountains for thousands of years. But among the Iroquois, or the Six Nations, we've always known and utilized these mountains in terms of the food, medicinal plants. Even some folks lived here.
Settlers began to arrive in the early 1800s. Many learned survival skills from their indigenous neighbors and soon began to engage in hunting, trapping, and logging. In 1819, Jacob Smith Moody arrived and laid claim to 160 acres of land. 8 years later, Captain Pliny Miller bought 600 acres along the Saranac River. He dammed the river and created a mill pond to power his sawmill. That pond became Lake Flower.
By the late 19th century, we get into what's called the Great Camp Era. You have a new wealthy population in the United States, and they're able to purchase land. They have the time and the money to be able to build homes, and they have the ability to hire enough people to make that happen. Lots of the great camps developed in areas around existing hotels. And a great example is Paul Smith's. Paul Smith started with running a hunting camp, and as the number of tourists increased in the Adirondacks, he established a hotel. And that hotel grew in size and fame and fortune with his expansive and magnificent hospitality.
The Saranac Lake region developed as a resort destination. Hotels like Martin's and Saranac Inn sprang up on Upper and Lower Saranac Lakes. The great camps followed. Dozens of elaborate summer residences dotted the shores of lakes, from Upper St. Regis to Loon Lake. The local economy expanded. Railroads connected Saranac Lake to other parts of the Adirondacks and beyond. This in turn spurred more development and tourism. In 1883, William A. Martin began making his eggshells, ultralight vessels called guideboats, specially designed for navigating the region's countless lakes, rivers, and streams. These boats are still made today. In 1873, Dr. Edward Livingston Trudeau arrived in Saranac Lake from New York City. The young doctor suffered from tuberculosis, an infectious disease that was killing 1 in 7 people in industrialized countries. There was no cure at the time.
The Great Camp story is not separate from the story of Dr. Trudeau and the establishment of the Saranac Lake tuberculosis cure, because Dr. Trudeau was on his way to stay at Paul Smith's. He was very ill, probably thought he might die, and got better. And because he was a doctor, he thought there might be something about the Adirondack environment that was going to cure tuberculosis.
Convinced of the curative power of the pure mountain air, He built the first successful tuberculosis hospital in North America. At his sanatorium, Dr. Trudeau prescribed a simple regimen of care: fresh air, rest, hygiene, good nutrition, and a positive outlook. One of Dr. Trudeau's first patients was well-known author Robert Louis Stevenson. Saranac Lake became known as a place of hope. When the village was incorporated, Dr. Trudeau was elected as its first mayor. Because of Dr. Trudeau's work, Saranac Lake developed into a center for medicine and microbiology. Dr. Trudeau was one of the first scientists to use a microscope to identify the tubercle bacillus, the microbe that causes tuberculosis. In 1894, he built the Saranac Laboratory, a state-of-the-art facility to study the disease. Over the next 6 decades, Saranac Lake grew rapidly as health seekers arrived from all over the world. Sanatoria were built in Saranac Lake and the surrounding region.
The sanatorium started out as a very small enterprise, and it grew in 2 ways. It grew because Dr. Trudeau's own researchers, the researchers he attracted, the way that research connected to what was happening in other places in Europe with people like Louis Pasteur attracts attention to Saranac Lake and, of course, spreads the renown of the possibilities for the rest cure. And so the curing industry grows. As it expands beyond the original buildings, soon people in Saranac Lake are able to start running kind of mini boarding houses, taking in cure patients, which is why you see so many of the big old houses in town with second-story sleeping porches, because year-round, patients were supposed to be outside. So even in the winter, in the coldest days of winter, they were outside, bundled up, resting and breathing the healing air.
The entire community provided care to tuberculosis sufferers. Doctors and nurses served prominent roles in the village. Young people worked as tray boys and girls, carrying meals to bedridden patients. Downtown businesses, like taxi companies, laundries, furriers, and pharmacies, catered to the needs of TB patients and their families. Craftsmen built cure chairs and made hot water bottles, also known as stone pigs. Dairy farms throughout the region provided milk for prescribed calorie-rich diets. Local churches administered to the spiritual needs of an ever-growing population. In 1898, Saranac Lake celebrated its first winter carnival, a tradition that continues today. The festival provided entertainment to patients and their families through the long, dark winter. By the 1920s, Saranac Lake boasted 13 hotels, several movie theaters, and countless speakeasies. Individual cure cottages began to cater to specific populations: veterans of the Great War, vaudeville and Hollywood actors, and people of different nationalities. There were cottages for both wealthy and working class. Some cottages accommodated those who were unable to afford care. By the early 1950s, research conducted at Trudeau and other facilities led to an effective antibiotic treatment for tuberculosis. This signaled an end to Saranac Lake's booming healthcare economy. In recent decades, Saranac Lake has regained its footing. The lush, natural environment continues to attract visitors from around the world. Located in the heart of the 6 million acres of the Adirondack Park, the village is home to approximately 5,000 people, 2 colleges, museums, a thriving art scene, and many small businesses. Dr. Trudeau's legacy lives on at the Trudeau Institute, which continues to serve as a world-class research facility studying immunity to infectious disease.
In modern Saranac Lake, you see all of the threads of continuity with the history of Saranac Lake, the different kinds of industry, tourism, great camps, summer homes, vacation cottages, fishing, hunting, skiing, canoeing, and we can find all those in the past, and we can see those are all the threads that are going to lead to whatever future is crafted.
You take care of the land, and we have a concept of 7 generations ahead, and anything that we do in our lifetime, any decision we make, any mark we make on the ground, anything we throw away, we always keep in mind, how is that going to affect the 7th generation ahead, the ones that aren't here yet? Is it going to be beneficial or is it going to be harmful? These mountains are my home. These mountains are home to a lot of indigenous people. These mountains are home to folks of European descent, of African descent, of Asian descent. All people love these mountains that come here, and they'll keep coming back because of the beauty. The water, the air is clean and pristine. These mountains and their beauty and all that they provide for us isn't something new. It's been going on for thousands of years. Hopefully continue for thousands of years.